So, after this very short coffee break, which we ask your pardon for, but the time has passed, so we have to continue. We would continue with higher perspective. Till now, the presentations focused on individual states, countries. How can we model sustainable energy strategy, sustainable energy systems for the individual states? But I believe, and as I was pointed out in my introductory remarks, I believe that if we really would like to build up a sustainable energy system in those countries or member states, some of them are already EU member states, we really need regional cooperation, and simply on the national energy markets, I wouldn't say that impossible, but it's not very cost efficient to create those energy models. So we need a regional perspective on grid regulation, regional perspective on what kind of renewable energy sources we use. The different countries have different advantages. Some renewable sources are most useful in some countries. In some other countries, other renewable sources could be used in a vast level. And also, as it was mentioned, perhaps biomass might have a more important role than in Western Europe. Still, we have to take into consideration the nature conservation aspects of the use of biomass, that the biomass should be used only if we can ensure the sustainability of biomass as energy source. But for all of that, we need a regional approach, a regional perspective. And now in this panel, in this roundtable discussion, I would like to ask the colleagues to show up a little bit or introduce us to this regional perspective, as each of them are running projects on regional energy modeling, regional energy strategy and planning. How the individual countries' energy models and energy strategies can be harmonized in a way that they don't hit each other. For example, just to mention one example, for example, in the Hungarian model, it's a quite complicated and huge modeling. By the end, the result is that, okay, we can make it, and during the winter time, we will import energy, and during the summertime, we will export energy. But what if every other country in the region wants to do the same? So there is not enough to plan and model energy systems for the future on the single nation-state level, but we have to harmonize the different models. I would say not only on a sustainable energy modeling level, but if you have a look on the official energy strategies of those countries, in most of the cases, all of the countries on a 2030 perspective, they want to export energy, but nobody tells us that who is going to buy that energy. So harmonization is not a specific issue for sustainable energy modeling, but in general energy policy in the region, this is a very important issue. But now we concentrate on the regional perspective and the alternative energy or sustainable energy modeling. And as we had a look on the individual countries' energy models or strategies, we see that there is a huge diversity of approaches, of the methodology used, even on simple facts like the cost of PV energy generation in 2025, there are huge differences between the different models. Is it possible to harmonize somehow methodology and modeling in the countries? Is it possible to harmonize the strategies of those countries? What is needed for that? Where we have to find stronger cooperation? What are the most important obstacles in the way of a better cooperation in the region, keeping in mind that some of the regional countries are members of the European Union, might be members of the Energy Union proposed by the EU. Some others are still not, but in the near future they might become member of the Energy Union and the European Union. So there are a lot of open questions to be answered, and here in this panel I would like to ask our three speakers to give us an insight on those questions. First, Mr. László Szabó, who is a senior researcher at the Regional Center for Energy Policy and Research, REC, in Hungary at Corvinus University since 2010, focusing on various energy-related topics, amongst them the regulation of renewable energy sources, which is one of the key issues. Then we have József Fejler, who is a senior associate at the Central and Eastern Europe program of the European Climate Foundation, which aims to help Europe turn into a low-carbon society and play a strong international leadership role to mitigate climate change. Before this, Mr. Fejler worked for the Regional Environmental Center in Hungary, also for the Parliamentary Commissioner for Future Generations, and spent years in the public administration and on the governmental level climate policy in Hungary. And we have Mr. András Krolop, who is a senior policy advisor at the Nature Conservancy, a leading nature conservancy organization in the world. He is responsible for European governmental relations with special focus on the EU institution in support of the NGO's conservation public funding priorities, and he is also dealing with biodiversity finance, science and policy interface, as well as sustainable energy projects. And I would like to ask you to give us an insight on the regional perspective, and first I would give the floor to Mr. László Szabó.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It is my pleasure to start the panel, and actually what I would like to do is maybe two things, not only one, because first when I received the question that whether I could participate on this panel, I was asked to reflect on the issues which we have just listened before. So partly I will cover this task as well, so I will try to reflect some of the issues which we have covered. Maybe I can call them dilemmas. And I collected many of them. That's what I would like to focus. I would like to focus on maybe on 6 of them. And at the same time, because we are at REC, we are working quite a lot in the region, the Southeast European region, and we have actually a project which is going on since this June till the next summer. I will focus on this CERMA project as well, because it's actually modeling a long-term electricity roadmap for the region. And what we were talking about, what are dilemmas here, we are facing the same problems, and I will show you who will try to actually solve these issues in this whole exercise or the whole project of the CERMA project. And what I would like to start with, let's start with these dilemmas which I just collected from the morning session. The first one is that we were talking about the learning process in the sense of this renewable technology learning, but it's learning in modeling as well. What we see, and the REC actually is working since 4 or 5 years in the region quite intensively, is that learning is there in the region. We are facing modeling teams within the countries which are excellent teams in each of the countries. So actually the question is why we are there and what can we help in this. What we can see there is that they have really perfect model, but we are facing similar questions or problems or issues which was raised by Benedek, is that sometimes when you are dealing with your own national system, sometimes you might miss something. And that's what we are bringing into the project. Actually, it's not only REC, but an international team, so the Austrian university is there in the CERMA project with the Greenix model. There is a local team from Serbia who is applying the regional network model as well. And there is a macroeconomic modeling team. And all of the teams which can add to this local content or local knowledge is the regional view of what we can see as what the electricity system works, what are the interactions between the partners, what are the interactions between the countries as well. We are on a nice process, but we have to say that there is a long way ahead. Just to reflect, there was a nice presentation from the Danish presenter. We saw that for years, what you saw there, the official command and control type governmental focus for the countries. And it's a nice way that you have to start with alternative, we can call still them alternative, I think, approaches, where you can show that, okay, there is the official projection and focus, but there can be other ways to present the development in the sectors as well. So I think it's still a case in the region that we are at the beginning of this process, and the more modelers are dealing with this and showing their results, the better it is. The second issue which I was putting on my list is the market design problems and issues which Christian was bringing into the picture. And the most important questions are there, that how the European system, at least when we deal with the electricity sector, will look like. Because the electricity system is a connected system. When you are doing a national model, sometimes I'm just sitting behind and telling that, oh, it's again, could be a very difficult task. Just imagine a situation, I always give the example of Hungary, but it's the same for all countries in the regions. Once you are doing only a national model, you cannot really model import and export relationship with the others, which is very, very important. It will become even more important even without renewables. With renewables, it will be even a must that you have to look at your neighbors. You have to look not only your close neighbors, but the whole region as well, and the European policies as well. That's why I brought here this market design problem, and this is an issue which we are facing as well in the CERMA project as well, that who the future, even if you are just looking up to 2030, but if you are looking up to 2050, who the future of the new market design of Europe will look like, because by that time, this region will be in European standards. You will apply the same rules as any other European countries. And the question comes that how you will treat your carbon emission, how will you tax it, how will you deal with the renewable energy sources in your system. The big question marks here at Europe, and you will see that it will have repercussions on your countries as well, that, okay, what will be the road ahead, not only in 20 years' time, but in the next few years. Whether ETS will be strengthened more, or it will be the renewable target setting and support scheme will be strengthened, or they can coexist together, because all these issues will have implication that what is the way for your countries as well in the near future. A second issue which I was putting there. A third issue which might not be a separate issue from this is the coal issue. And we saw in all the presentation, even about the German presentation, that the coal and lignite fired plants are there. Even when you just remember that Germany, if you remember that slide which Christian showed you, shows a very stable share of coal and lignite plants in the last 10 years. So what you don't see, disappearing these coal plants from the system. But there is one very important issue there, because what you have a look at the European countries, it's true that the coal is there and the lignite is there, but a big question mark where the new coal plants will come into, because that's a completely different issue. Because just if you have imagined that what happens in Germany, that you want to get rid of the nuclear power plants, you still have to produce a lot of electricity, then it's a strategy not to close down the otherwise maybe already shut down coal plants in your country. So in that sense, for a while you still keep up running your coal plants for a while till it can operate, and it's still, but there is a certain time slice where you will close it definitely. The question comes whether new coal plants will be there in the system. It's not true that there is no new plant in Europe, in Western. There are some plants which are still built, but those are the ones which were decided already lots of years ago. And this is a situation where we see the region is quite a different place in a sense. If you have a look at the strategic documents of all these countries, at least one or sometimes two or three coal or lignite plants are there in the official plans. And this is a big question which Benedek was asking, is whether this is really the case, that all of these countries can build up one or two, not small, but rather sizable lignite plant. Is it a good strategy for the countries to pursue this and to go for this? Or is there a better way to look at it and have a look at not only from the individual country point of view, but from a regional point of view? And this is again, an issue which we are looking for at the CERMA project as well, having a look whether this strategy to forward this, that every country will build its own new lignite or coal plant, whether this is the strategy which you should follow, or it can be coordinated, might be enough, maybe one or two in the region, or you might not need any new power plant at all, and you can solve all these issues without them. So this is a question, and connected to it, another dilemma, because you are doing all this modeling, and actually we were doing this modeling not only in this CERMA, but there was a previous project called SLED, and the question comes whether, when you are setting up these scenarios, we were listening to many scenarios already in this morning section, whether you are following the scenarios which the governments would like to see in their strategies, or you are going for this, we call sometimes alternative or more extreme scenarios, because if you really want to be policy relevant, then you have to somehow reflect their official views as well in the scenario. So actually what you are usually doing, and that's the way forward, and that's most of you are doing, is that you have to show some scenarios, of course, with the official plans and official capacity expansion as well, but at the same time show the policymakers some let's call again, maybe not a nice word, alternative scenarios where when you are just freeing up the thinking that you need these coal plants, and you might just start to think in other technologies or other demand projections as well. And what we faced actually in the last 4 years, but the situation is improving, that even showing policy makers, government representatives scenarios which have quite an extreme carbon reduction in the long term by 2030 and 2050, they don't really like to see sometimes, or when they say that, okay, but these scenarios we will not show and we will not put in the final reports and we will not make it public, because then people, NGOs will get no, and then it will have their own life. But that's the way, I mean, we'll have to show these scenarios and they will have their own life, and then in this way the public and the NGOs will have some pressure and some influence in all these policy making issue. The fourth dilemma which I was putting on my paper is integration, in a sense of quite integration in the wide sense that you have to integrate your system together with your neighbor, which means that it's a joint system where you are connected with your neighbor, so you cannot disregard this in the future. You might do it in the 1 or 2 years time, but when you are opening your market, those interconnections will start to work and you will see the impact on your system. So there is a challenge, and we are doing it in the CERMA as well, that you have to model the integrated system from the network point of view, which have quite a serious impact on it. You might think as well of when you are thinking of the electricity system, is that even integration of the balancing need in the various countries as well is a crucial issue. It's again an example of Hungary, but other countries in the region as well. You might not be the best situated alone to solve this problem in an economic way, but when you start to cooperate with your neighbor, it might be a win-win situation for both your country and for your neighboring country. It might be true that some players like the TSOs themselves might lose in the situation, but it's a very interesting situation when in both countries consumers would gain in the situation why the TSOs can prevent this type of development. It's an interesting issue. And integration in a sense that, and I fully agree with the Croatian presentation by Mr. Dujic, is that in a sense we will be narrow in the CERMA project, that we will be focusing on the electricity sector. And I fully agree with this. It's very nice if you can integrate these modeling with the other sectors as well, like industry, transport sector, and so on and so on. But it's quite a challenging task. I mean, even the electricity sector modeling has its challenges, but when you incorporate these other sectors, and you don't think nationally, but you have to incorporate more countries, industrial sector, transport sector, and so on, that's even a more challenging task in a sense. So that's in the future, but I fully agree with this remark as well. And maybe just to close this with the dilemmas and then the issues which I would like to cover as well, that I fully agree as well with Christian as well on the flexibility issue. These are very nice slides which he was showing on the German electricity sector, how it will look like maybe in 15 years time, 20 years time, 30 years time, which means that when you have renewable share above 20-30%, then it will be more difficult to integrate this system, not only at the transmission level, but at the distribution system level. And and it's Hungary as well, but your region will soon come to this path as well, maybe 10 years time. But you have to prepare for this as well. How will you solve this system? And when you are looking for solution, it's not the national system which you have to solve. It is your regional system or is the European system where you have to look for solution. I think the Southeast European electricity system is quite well designed for a regional cooperation by historical reason. It was cooperating for quite a long time together, which was at the point of time was stopped suddenly. But this is the future in spite of any other vision, is that you will have to start to cooperate on this. And this cooperation will bring benefits to most of the countries in the region if this cooperation is designed well. I think I use my time, so I pass my microphone to
Yeah, I would like to ask József Fejler to continue and just to raise one specific question that there is a clear need for stronger cooperation and integration, but the real question is that where we need stronger cooperation or stronger integration, as I think we can agree that, for example, from an infrastructure point of view, regional electricity systems at least are quite well connected, so that's not the most important obstacle. Where are the obstacles, and where we really need stronger cooperation among the countries of the region?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to address the conference. I think I will address this question. Probably I start with this, and then I have some other ideas if I might go into that. Well, on the regional cooperation, what we see is that when you look into the EU, there is quite good cooperation, and in some parts of the EU, some kind of regional cooperation.
You have to change the microphone. Change the microphone.
So I need to talk like this. Oh my God, I will eat it. We see cooperation emerging in various parts of Northern and Western Europe when we see the balancing issues coming up more, and the integration of renewables is addressed more than just having the PV on the roofs and the wind turbines installed. And we see that there is a need also for rethinking, even in the networks. When Laszlo mentioned the modeling which is going on, but we still has a little bit of challenge to see what will happen with the distributed networks and how to integrate them. And then we heard Professor Dujic talking about going much farther and to envision in modeling how the new type of network with the batteries of the cars and everything will operate. That can change the picture significantly. And in Southeast Europe, we are very far away from that cooperation, what is already emerging in Northern Europe and in Western Europe. We still don't have the balancing cooperation among the countries, which is a basic. We are missing one very big, important element, and this is liberalization of the markets. In some countries it started, but we need to see it happening. It will be profound when not state-owned electricity companies married to the ministries are running the show alone. then we see significant different dynamics. So that's another issue for the region. We are hopeful that the region can be turned from the home of the lignite. Well, lignite is the bread of people. to a region when renewables will have a showcase and a powerhouse of the region or even beyond. We see that now the states are planning to generate lignite-based electricity to sell into the EU ETS to create hard cash in the coming decades. Probably this is not the right way ahead. And we are seeing that they are competing in building up overcapacity, even on the same resource base, multiple power stations like in Bosnia, what we see. So that's a race which is not going well. But we see already that on gas networks, there is an increasing cooperation in the region. And in the region, I don't mean only the Western Balkans, but the whole Balkans, talking from Greece to Bulgaria, Romania, which are also countries where lignite is the bread of the people, although not so much as in the Western Balkans. But still, Bulgaria has a heavy duty. They are the only country which is practically defaulting in the current EU legislation regarding air quality because of the power fleet. So what we see is that the CSAC process on gas networks is stretching its touch towards the electricity systems, and together with the energy community, they can provide the basis for changes in the region. But I'm afraid that there is a need for further push. And we heard examples where such push can come. We heard about the modeling done by CEE ChangeNet. It would be good to see the modeling results of the carbon calculator brought into the national context, and I assume that it is happening and it will happen when Serbia is defining its own climate strategy, when Montenegro finding it difficult to plug the hole which is just created last week when the financing of a new lignite plant fall apart. So this kind of events and public awareness on the issue is needed, and I see that it's emerging among the NGO community. But I see also the need for something which is probably and hopefully coming from the regional exercise what Laszlo mentioned, that sometimes we have myths what are really covering the energy policy debate among the experts and the policymakers. They have just half knowledge on what's going on, and they have no awareness of what is possible and what is the playground. They don't know about that financing is drying out for lignite, so it will be very hard. Probably they are experiencing it. While renewables is available, they are not aware of the possibilities of renewables and photovoltaics. I've been just talking a month ago with someone from Albania running a startup on photovoltaics, and she told that, well, the common knowledge among engineers dealing with the electricity sector is like 5 years behind what is the current state of art regarding PV. So obviously they are not promoting it. We also have a strong state capture, and which is even worse, rent seeking from the state. So the price is not important because anyhow people pay the taxes, so they can cross-subsidize it. And then there is the families, the lovers, and whatever Garrett was mentioning, who are making good business on renewables in some countries. That's also an issue, bad policy, the policy failure issues. So what I see is that there is an increase of change, but we still see a lot of challenges. And then I cannot leave energy poverty as an issue of the region unmentioned, because we are facing that dilemma when you don't pay the real price of electricity, but people also challenged to pay the price of electricity at the same time. How to address this dilemma. Another social dilemma what we are facing is what happens with the people who had lignite as a bread, the miners and those working in the power sector. Just transition is something which is emerging as an issue, and we see discussions in Germany and all around how to address the communities. We saw many unjust transitions. The most spectacular in the region are from Romania. If you go to all the mining areas of Romania, you see the abandoned villages and everything is grey and people are desperate, and that probably not the way forward in this case. So there is a challenge on that end as well. So multiple challenges are there. We see that NGOs with their modeling exercise can do a lot, and we also see that destroying the myths and half-truths about the future and the possibilities is another bit. It is not addressing the issue of oligarchs, state capture, and the families, friends, and lovers issue, but something should move. And what we see is already, even in Serbia, where we see the most stubborn state-owned electricity company, that they are starting to talk about the end of the lignite era. So there is a hope, and we see that something is moving on the Balkans in this direction.
Thank you, and I'm sure that there is a hope, and we cannot give up the hope to make a major shift in energy systems in the Central and Eastern European and the Southeast European region. And András, I would like to ask you that as a reflection to all those we have already heard, that according to your evaluation, what are the most important obstacles of moving ahead? Because I believe that from a professional perspective, it's quite clear that the future of energy systems in the region are in the renewables energy efficiency area, and that's what makes those countries competitive and successful in the future. Still, we see a lot of resistance, or things are changing very slowly. According to you, what are the most important elements of this resistance, and how can we overcome? That's a simple question.
Thank you very much. Simple question, difficult answer. Let me take a step back, first of all. And I believe that we are, well, not we, but at least I'm missing a little bit the big picture here. I think we are talking about the energy future of these regions and these countries because of environmental related issues. We are facing climate change, and we would like to do something about climate change. One way is to try moving towards renewable energy. That is one thing. The other thing is that, and that is where I'm coming from, my organization is actually the white elephant in the room. It's very American-based. We don't actually work in the Balkan region directly. We don't have offices there, yet we work in 50 other countries. And what we identified is that actually we had a journey over the past 60 years, being very space-based and doing nature conservation kind of locally. We moved over to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. And non-surprisingly, energy-related question is among the leading one, or with different terms, it has been identified so often that climate change is the number one drivers of biodiversity loss. Now again, changing it to nature conservation, what we have noticed through studies that we anticipate a huge surge on installed hydro capacity globally. And that is the number one factor for loss of aquatic biodiversity. So that is where we started to look into a big picture, how we can actually very pragmatically shift the needle and move the somewhat very scientific, almost geeky discussions to actually policy shift and delivering on the ground. And that is how we ended up actually in the Western Balkans on the invitation of WWF to use one of the models. There are so many models around. We have also, of course, one of ours, to see whether there is any way to identify how the energy future of these countries, what has been identified in various scenarios or national energy plans, can be actually fulfilled by the use of renewables with the minimum and with the least impact on biodiversity. So that is where we started. And we started to map out what is actually the situation in these countries. And it turned out that almost without exception, the Balkan countries are really looking at hydro as the number one potential for renewables. You might be surprised if you're not working on that just right now, on the tables of the European Investment Bank and the EBRD, there are over 2,500 requests for project funding for hydro development in the Balkans. What is massive, and it will have a very, very significant impact on, among others, biodiversity as well. Many of these dams that are planned are really micro dams. We are talking about dams of 1 meter height, yet they can completely eradicate the aquatic population of a river. So starting from there, we had run the figures through our modeling and exercise, and we realized that, well, actually, there's a lot more potential besides hydro, and as you always said it already, there's solar, there's wind, there's biomass, there's plenty of other things. So having another spin at it, what is the potential for fulfilling the energy needs from these renewables, but putting their conditionalities? And the conditionalities were the least environmental or biodiversity impact. So obviously, and I don't need to tell you, you can put solar panels all over the place, but if you put it in national parks, it will be a problem. Or if you're building dams in Natura 2000 site, the future Natura 2000 site, that will be a problem. So what we did, and that is what we use, what we have been done in California, what is committed itself to have 50% renewable by 2050, and actually moving towards that. How we can kind of overlay the systems, like putting in the conditionalities, like no protected areas, no rivers with interesting biodiversity, and plenty of other ones. What can be done? It turns out, as I said before, there is an energy future based on renewables for these countries. But then comes, of course, the question, now I'm coming back to you, Benza, how to actually make it happen. And that is when we have to start looking at where are the major levers on a policy field. Because we are talking about investments. And investments are happening for a couple of reasons. One of them is that there is a need for it, there's a market niche for it, and there's an investor to pay for it. So that is what we also need to address. And thirdly, maybe less importantly, there are also the global processes like the Paris outcome, the Paris Agreement, that countries are ideally fulfilling and committing to that. So that is how we started to talk to the major levers in this region. And again, it was said so often, obviously the EU is there, and the carrot at the end of the road, the EU accession is there. So through the accession process, a lot of things can be steered from the EU. And I was actually very happy to hear, and eventually then later participate, that the Balkan countries themselves, the Western Balkan countries, came to the EU with a demand that they would like to see a lot more regional cooperation, and they would like to have, to begin with, that's what I'm saying, they didn't say to begin with, a hydropower master plan for the region, when they are really looking hydropower planning across the countries. And now that is what DG NEAR, one of the unit of the EU, is sponsoring and actually is moving ahead, and we expect the first reports to be read, delivered towards early spring, February, April, it should be there. But then, of course, it comes to asking the question, like, if there is a master plan for hydro, what forbids the EU, what forbids the major actors to have a master plan for the other renewables as well, a regional master plan? And now, what is with the financiers? They are struggling with the fact that they have to sponsor projects that are very risky projects sometimes, and I could tell you, and there's no need for actually going there, project that has been stopped because of big oppositions. I'm talking about hydro projects now in the region. And millions of euros have been burned there just in the preparatory phase, and the project didn't go anywhere. So what we have been discussing with the major investors, and that is also the example coming from Latin America with working with the Inter-American Development Bank, is kind of an early planning facility. Like if we accept that there is a renewable future for the region, then we should be able to scout out what would be the best siting for this renewable, what would be the healthy mix between solar and wind and the others. And once we have it, then the investors could also see that if it went through the proper consultation process, then there's a buy-in from the region. So once they start throwing money at it, then actually the project is not going to sink the funds away, but it will be implemented with the least resistance and with the best possible outcome. So back to your question, Ben, so just to conclude with a sentence, I think what would be really interesting to see that on one hand, all the modeling exercise that is done is kind of trying to be harmonized, and I don't know, it's kind of a tantalizing work to be done because everybody is kind of sticking to its own model. But there must be overlaps. And if we are not able to do that, then we are running the risk that whenever it gets to the decision maker's table, they can turn the models against each other. Like one model is predicting this and that, the other one is going to say that. So whom I should believe? Either nobody or I go to the least resistance. And the other one is once we have the models kind of accepted, then we need to really bring it up to the decision makers level. And now it is really the triangulation between the countries' governments, the EU, and the financiers.
Thank you, and I'm full of questions. Still, as we have not too much time left, I would like to open the floor for questions, and I already see 2 questions, perhaps not just those who are already posed questions, but of course you will have the time to make your questions, but some others could have access to the public. First here.
Thank you. My name is Lin Herencic. I come from Croatia. And regarding all these presentations, everybody almost said that, and we have seen that technically the transition is possible. The main questions are the costs and the benefits of it. So regarding cost, we also, and I am working on a low carbon development strategy for Croatia, together with other, for example, Professor Dujic. And we have seen that also that there, with some scenarios, there is possible that the system cost can be more or less neutral. But there is happening one significant shift from fuel, from paying for the fuels to paying for the technologies, and not so much in the energy system transformations, but mostly technologies in demand side. For example, renovation of the buildings and electrical vehicles, and and also in the demand side, in the transformations, the shift is the same from the paying for the fuels to paying for the technologies. So for the countries which don't have their own fuels, that's very positive, because before, for example, Croatia is mostly import fossil fuels. Before we were paying for, or now we are paying for the import of fuels. We know where does this fuel mostly come from. And now we will have maybe a chance to invest that money in technologies, which maybe some of them we can produce. But for some countries, for example, Kosovo, which has their own coal, it's a little bit different. They will have to invest in technologies which is not so easy to produce. So my question is for you. I think this region is a bit catching the train of technological on production of these technologies we have, because wind and solar PV is quite already almost matured technology, and it's not easy for our companies in the region which are not so advanced as in Western or North Europe to catch that train. And so how do you see the possibilities for the region to be competitive, not only in buying technologies and installing, but also adding value in their economical systems of the region regarding production of parts or all technologies? For PV, that's maybe more potential, because the cost of the panel is only around 30 or 40%, but for wind it's not so easy to catch that, to translate this, that the technology add value to the economy of the country.
Thank you, and I would like to pool, let's say, 3 questions. I've seen Gareth, you on the back, and here. Let's pool the questions, and then you can react on them together.
Thanks. An observation from earlier. I think it would have been good to have someone here from Energy Community, because they have the legal framework not just for Southeast Europe but also the Visegrad countries. So if we're thinking about cooperation in Central and Eastern Europe, would be good to have someone here from that. The second thing is about the hydro plan. I am greatly concerned about it because we've seen the terms of reference, and it's basically 3 engineers, and there's 1 environmentalist, and that environmentalist, according to the TORs, can be an engineer chemist as long as he knows something about SEAs. There's also no commitment in there to keep out of protected areas, and there's nobody there for public consultations, and there's a line in the risk says must manage the very negative but highly motivated civil society organizations in this process. That's a risk that they put in, and they haven't even put in a person to deal with facilitation. So already a network of NGOs has written to Han, its DG NEAR is doing it, saying that if you want NGOs to be not part of your risk, you better read your own risk and do something about it. So I agree with you about this. I think the reason why there's hydro and coal continue to be built is because of what Josef said, state capture. They know the technology, they know the people, they can sell the rights to the water, and they can also turn the coal mines into a black box to make profit from. They're not sure about solar technology, and they're not sure about wind, it being expensive, and they're not sure how to create state capture opportunities so that they can rob, basically, the state. And I'm afraid with the hydro plan, what we're not going to get is we're not going to get it in the context of which we asked for. Hydro should be prioritized that leads to the shutting down of coal, or is going to be used as pump storage for RES in the future. We asked that to be the ultimate criteria, all other things being equal. And DG NEAR was saying to me, but why? And we said, because you want these people to be in the EU, so if you go ahead with this hydro plan, you'll basically rubber stamp large dams for export to Europe for ETS, extra profit, and coal for at home paid for by the Chinese. So it's really worrying, the linkage, both positive and negative, that's going on between Southeast Europe and Europe proper, let's say.
Thank you, and there is a third question.
I think it's a very short question, and it's just an analysis on what I tried to listen to today. We've been hearing a lot about the macroeconomical issues related to energy transition, but I've not heard anything about the meso and micro level of energy business models. Not number energy models, but business models for energy markets. And I would be happy to talk and to work a little bit more on these issues in the particular countries we are talking about today. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, maybe I have no answers to all of them. I try to go in order. So first question was that maybe if I translate it to myself, local value added in the different technologies. And I eat it, okay, so I put it. So if I translate your question, the question was that, okay, traditional technologies where some countries have some advantages and even local value added to it, while in other technologies we are afraid a bit that we just have to buy it from outside and just place it there, and there is no real impact on the local economy. And you have answered this as well, that we see these differences between the PV and the wind technology as well at the same time, because in PV you might have some really high value added content in your region. Mainly if you can assemble these things, I mean not producing the panels themselves, but assembling it and placing it in their place, the value added is there. So I think that impact is even higher than a traditional plant where you don't have too many operators of the plant. I mean, once you are building up a hydro plant, then you don't need too many local value added in labor and so on. It's true that in wind, I don't see that argument because probably you will buy it from abroad. You don't really need too many personnel for the operation, so that's true that in a sense you have this technological investment. I mean, investment cost compared to import of fuels. It might be true, but I would like to emphasize here that for example, in this CERMA project, we will try to assess this. So in the macroeconomic model, not only the labor impact we would like to assess, but we would like to assess the impact on for example, what is the impact on on your trade position and things like indebtedness and so on and so on. We'll see if there will be an impact from the various technologies. I'm just curious about the results. I don't want to go in details because we don't have yet the modeling exercise finished. The second question was on this energy community. Yes, they should be here because I would be very curious about the opinion about the whole regionalization and so on. And the hydro plant, we have not too many information about this. So it would be very nice if the result is there already by the time. I'm a bit afraid that there would be some delays as well there. So we might not be able to read it in the springtime. We'll see if we manage to get this finished. Once we have it, then the question comes that, okay, who will use it? And the last question, I cannot really answer. I mean, meso and micro level, you can mean quite many things on this. So I would need more details what you mean by this modeling the meso and the micro level. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay. Just one more thing on this, maybe. I put one more dilemma beforehand, and I didn't listed it before. Because when we are talking about this energy transition, and I think it's a big issue, is that it's someone at the very beginning of the day was calling that maybe it was Benedek who was telling that this is a revolution. And I wouldn't use this word revolution, I prefer this transition, because what we see in this market as well, with the others as well, that the two types of actors, the incumbents and the newcomers, they might not have the same incentives and the same stakes in it. And if we are looking at the Southeast European market, it might be even more true. The incumbents, and sometimes they are state-owned company, can do quite a lot of things to make this process very slow or even impossible. And that's what we really have to think of as well. Whether who can you make that new entrants can enter the market without really suffering that much, as we have seen in some other examples. Mm-hmm. Yes. So they have more strategies in different countries as well.
Just if I could have a very quick crack of the questions. One of the technology, I cannot really say much about it. I think it's just logical to go for the best available technology. If it is available, then one should just use it. There is the car Tesla out there. I don't think that all the countries should start designing their Teslas. Just take it over. Maybe you do some refinement. On the hydro, I mean, I'm happy to do it later bilaterally, but we are also very concerned about this whole effort that is going on for this hydropower master plan. We think that it's extremely accelerated. We're concerned about the actual depth of the result, what is coming out, and also how it is going to be taken out. Having questioned us to the EU and also to the governments, they all said that actually what they would like to get out of this master plan is the identification of the hydro plans, what needs to get EU type of financing, either from the EU directly through the pre-accession process or from the European banks. And again, the question still remains in the air, like why is it only hydro and nothing else, and how this process is going to be kind of unraveling. We are very, very concerned. And last on the trade, again, I think the interesting bit what you just said before is that I believe very much of the renewable investments in the Western Balkan countries are done because of responding to a market need outside of the Western Balkan countries. So there is, I believe, Austria, there is Italy, who are planning to fulfill their energy targets, sustainable energy targets, by buying electricity, green electricity or renewable electricity outside of these countries. And for them to invest in Western Balkans, to buy the energy, procure the energy from there is cheaper than do it at home. So that happens. I don't know if you're aware of the study made by the Bankwatch network. They really try to look into the various kind of shell companies and all that operating in the Western Balkan, sponsoring energy infrastructure development. And sometimes they are really, really difficult to track down and find they are leading back to West European companies who are kind of regrouping, losing their identity and investing in the Balkan, or not in rather controversial projects sometimes.
On the first question, when I heard about Kosovo as an example, I just remember that 2 weeks ago I heard that there is a PV production plant in Kosovo. So it's not something unavailable in the region to do things like that. But I think you cannot do everything and gain on everything. The transition is not something as a luxury what you can choose. It's you either do it or you do it. I mean, you don't have a choice. This is the big question is now how fast. So I would not consider it. But on the other hand, when you look into the demand side, I see a lot of added value production in the building energy efficiency measures where local work and local products can mean a lot. And also when you are talking about biomass, one of my colleagues is bothering me always with, okay, biomass for local use on the Balkans. And I said that, okay, pellet is just too expensive. Wood gasification is too expensive. And then I was in Bulgaria 2 weeks ago and they produce wood gasification local machines, half of the price what I thought is available. So there can be other things when it comes to biomass, but I would caution about biomass on the Balkans because what we know is that there is an over-exploitation of the forests. In Albania, there is a moratorium on forest exploitation because of this region. We know a scandal from Serbia about this issue. So there are issues with biomass. On hydro, I think everything is said. I don't have anything to add. Let's see what we will see. I know that they want to produce the report in 1 year. So they want to show it at the next meeting of the Berlin process. There was a pledging in Paris this July, I think. And then they want to bring it back, the report, by a year. So that there is a reason for concern, obviously. On the business model for the energy market, there is one thing I forgot to mention, but I wanted to mention before, that we have a problem on the Balkans: high cost of capital, and that in some cases might just diminish the potential advantage of the higher solar gain and other potential. So that's the bigger business environment which has to be improved. And probably here we can also count on some of the institutional mechanisms that the cost is reduced by the involvement of EIB or other public banks, which can help to change this situation, at least in some of the cases. But there's another thing which came to my mind. Sorry, I have to eat it. I always forget. That a couple of months ago I was at a course when someone was talking about the German energy transition, and there was a very interesting picture that a couple of years ago, around 2008-9, there were 4 big energy companies running the show in the electricity market in Germany, to the extent of more than 80%. Now it is less than 60%. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then if you look into this change, who came into the picture? These are the small electricity producers. So there is a possibility for startups to come in. So there is a niche. I think the big question is the cost of capital and also the bottlenecks, what we see both from the business side and both from the administrative side, including corruption and all these kind of hurdles what we have on the Balkans. So we have a lot to do, but there are potentials.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that there are hundreds of additional questions to be raised here, but unfortunately the time is over, so we have to stop it here, this conversation. So I would like to say thank you for our panelists to participate in this discussion and sharing their views and ideas on the questions of sustainable and renewable energy efficiency based energy systems for the Central and Eastern European and the Southeast European region. And thank you for all for joining us. Here we have to stop this discussion. As a short wrap up, I would like to ask Orsolya Fülöp to come up and just we can together close a little bit this conference.